Hello. So, as we begin our look into the Canadian Criminal Code, we need to start off by looking at what the investigation and arrests are in Canada. So, let's get started. This deals with mainly with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the national police for the country, their investigation, the evidence, the arresting and/or detention of a citizen or individual within the boundaries of Canada or anywhere that we have an extradition treaty with. Now, going with the RCMP, Canada's federal police force is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They are, in fact, an actual branch of the armed forces, along with the Army, Navy, Air Force, or even CSIS, the Secret Intelligence Services. But the history with the RCMP is an interesting history. The RCMP originally were called the Northwest Mounted Police when they were established in 1873. They were there to enforce Canadian law in the West after Rupert's Land was overgiven to the Canadian government from the Hudson Bay Company and the upcoming settlement of the Red River Settlements Valley. The Northwest Mounted Police were there to ensure that the Cree got a fair deal in their tradings with the company and the Americans. However, because of the Winnipeg General Strike in 1929, the Northwest Mounted Police were merged with the Dominion Police, that being Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, EI, Nova Scotia. These two different police forces were merged into one, which would be the RCMP. And the RCMP will be there to investigate, to provide protective services for the federal government, to be a provincial police, in some circumstances a provincial police, and be there in all provinces and territories except for Quebec, Ontario, and Newfoundland, who have formed their own provincial police forces. But did you know that the RCMP is a paramilitary force? It can actually be considered to be a branch of the armed forces. With that kind of capability, the RCMP's primary focus are 8 different things. One is customs and excise. Customs and excise basically deals with cases of international smuggling, taxes, and tariffs. The second enforcement or focus is drug enforcement, where they'll deal with controlled drugs, substance act, smuggling. Third focus is economic crimes, organized crime, fraud, money laundering. Fourth is policing for the federal government, where they provide public safety and consumer protection. 5. Immigration, where they'll look down anyone who is in Canada illegally. 6. The proceeds of crime, which is a confiscation of money or property derived from crime, such as money laundering, dirty money, proceeds of crime, and money laundering has been a serious, substantial issue in British Columbia with recent developments and ongoing investigations with the casinos and offshore money. 7 is criminal intelligence, which is gathering information on organized crime and/or terrorist groups. And then 8 is being an international liaison and protective services, which is providing security for federal officials and visiting heads of state. So as you can see, the RCMP's mandate is pretty substantial, and that does really show to a typical example of most organizations or responsibilities in Canada, where they are given a really, really large mandate, but sometimes the funding is not always there to provide everything that is required. As case in point, British Columbia Parks, BC Parks, has a substantial mandate covering all provincial parks in the province, but is always underfunded, which means they can't hire enough people, and the parks are not always in good condition. It's a typical example of bureaucracy, unfortunately. But with the RCMP, of course, the most iconic symbol is the Mountie, the guy with the red jacket, the hat, riding a horse. If that's a common symbol, this is what the common officers will look like, especially in locations such as Surrey or Richmond, who do not have a municipal police force and, in fact, have only the RCMP as their police. British Columbia does not have a provincial police, so by default, the RCMP are the provincial police for British Columbia. And every 20 or so years, the contract with the RCMP is renewed. But with the provincial police, Ontario, Quebec, and Newfoundland have their own established provincial police, and these will work in jurisdiction of rural areas and unincorporated areas around cities that do not have their own municipal police forces. For these provinces to have their own police, the RCMP are there, but they work in tandem in collaboration with the provincial police. And having a provincial police means that the province will pay for it themselves. Municipal essentially means these are police forces whose mandate is just in the city itself. Police towns or cities are funded by the municipality only. A local police or municipal police duties will include any of the following, such as preserving the peace, preventing crime, assisting victims of crime, apprehending criminals, laying charges and participating in prosecutions, executing court-issued warrants, and or enforcing various municipal bylaws. There, in some ways, municipalities prefer municipal police because an RCMP officer, while is connected to the community, is only stationed in that community up to around 8 years before they are transferred to a different location. Whereas a local officer may live, have his own or family in the municipality. So it is felt that a municipal police officer has more of a personal investment in preserving law and order and good peace in that town compared to the RCMP. But that's the general sort of stereotype. If you're not too sure what a municipal police may look like, here's an example of the Vancouver Police Department cruiser or the Abbotsford Police Department. Actually, there are quite a few different police jurisdictions in Metro Vancouver, from Vancouver, Abbotsford, Port Moody, New Westminster. TransLink even has their own police along with there's the RCMP as well. There is a lot of different police organizations, and that has been widely criticized for inefficiency and bureaucratic mess. But with funding, though, and other facts about policing, um, Canada has about 62,500 men and women who are officers. Collectively, it's about $6.5 billion. So, on average, for every 100,000 people, you have 192 officers, with the ratio being the lowest in Newfoundland and PEI. However, in the United States, though, for every 100,000 people, you have 262 officers. It shows another characteristical difference between the two countries. But when it comes to our iconic symbols, of course, the RCMP, the Mounties, when they do their famous cavalry charges at location events such as the Calgary Stampede. But moving along with the investigation and arrest, we have the crime scene investigation. No matter it's provincial, RCMP, or municipal, these are all elements that these uh, police forces will do. Now, a crime scene is a site where the offense took place. The key to the crime scene is how it is preserved, so no evidence is tampered. Otherwise, it will be difficult to prove it in court. Police must get emergency crews onto scene, eliminate hazards, and search the scene for any perpetrators. The success of any prosecution rests on the physical evidence taken from the scene. So officers need to establish two boundaries at the scene of the crime. First is the center, and then second is the perimeter. The center of the crime is where the actual crime happened at that particular spot, whereas the perimeter is the surrounding area where the offender may have left some evidence nearby, from footprints to shreds of DNA or accessories to the crime. Now, the reason why crime scenes are preserved is threefold. One is to allow a thorough search of the scene so as much evidence is gathered before too much time has passed. So justice can be served. Second is to seize and collect this physical evidence. And third is to ensure the evidence is seized in an admissible way in the court, there, in a way that the court will accept this evidence as being completely legitimate and not being tampered. Contaminated evidence may be inadmissible or lead to police forming the wrong conclusion. So, crime scene investigation shows such as CSI is really, really important. But within the crime scene, there are four officers types. The first is the patrol officer. The patrol officer are the first to arrive in the scene, and they make arrests if necessary or secure the scene, usually by using that police yellow tape. Second is the scenes of the crime officer, who is trained to collect evidence in a court admissible way for collection and preservation. Third is the criminal identification officer, who is responsible for searching the crime scene and gathering evidence to send it to the lab. And then fourth is the criminal investigations officer, who essentially is someone who's in plain clothes, could be a detective, and supervises the investigation. The criminal investigation officer is a really important role because sometimes, especially if you're dealing with a criminal matter, the potential suspect or perpetrator may still be nearby and may want to watch the scene as a form of satisfaction or whatever perverse manner they are looking for. As you see the photograph of the top right corner, that shows the way a house scene is preserved from the evidence and the documentation securing the zone versus the perimeter. Now, for physical evidence, it can include any object, impression, or bodily element that could be used to prove or disprove facts. Usually, physical evidence carries more weight than eyewitness account, but having the eyewitness account is also a vitally important part of any crime scene and ongoing potential cases. For forensic science, this refers to the use of biochemical and other scientific techniques to analyze evidence in the crime investigation. Scientists examine and analyze the physical evidence found at the crime, and with forensic scientists, they give expert evidence at trials, they perform autopsies, analyze firearms and bullets, have expertise such as analyzing paint to tell which car was involved. There's actually our entomologists, who are specialists who can examine the time of death by examining the life stages of the insects, i.e., they deal with bodies, maggots, larvae, bugs, that when a body has been found in the various stages of decomposition. And some forensic scientists are experts at examining tool marks such as hammers, crowbars, screwdrivers, as they are the most commonly used forms of a murder or assault in a crime. Continuing along with the elements of the crime are the impressions. Some examine the impressions, patterns, or marks found on surfaces and caused by various objects. They will photograph, scan, or take a mold of the impression the magic with an object. Even tire prints can be formed as an impression to match it to tires if there was a getaway vehicle. Impressions can have class characteristics of general attributes or individual characteristics, whether it's light person, heavy person, walking, running. It's incredible what can be determined with this scene. But one of the most incredible elements is fingerprinting. Fingerprinting is a pattern mark left on the surface of any fingerprint. Prints can come from hands, feet, and or toes. A print is unique to each individual and useful in identifying offenders, unfortunately, in some cases. And as you see in this image, there are four types of fingerprints: arch, whorl, double loops, or simple loop. You want to pause the video for a moment and look at your fingertip to see what kind of a pattern you have. Each one of us, our fingerprint is unique to our own, but there is a pattern type. And going along more with fingerprinting, you can see there's a visible fingerprint, which means a print form when the fingertip is going blood, grease, or some sort of a liquid substance that's on the surface. There's a latent fingerprint, which is formed by natural oils. There is dusted, which is used by graphite powder, or iodine fuming, which is used involving iodine to expose areas on cloth or paper for. There's also other kind of chemicals um, to bring out a fingerprint if the scene of the crime had been attempted to be scrubbed by the perpetrator. In this image, you'll see the seven different elements of how fingerprints are defined. Perhaps once again you want to pause the video and examine this to see if you can find it on your own. Here's a graphite. Typical example of fingerprint preservation, documentation. What this all leads to is DNA evidence. Since the discovery and utilization of DNA, crime scene investigation has been drastically changed. Blood, semen, hair, mucus, skin are often left at a crime scene, and any of these can be used to test for DNA and then match results to a particular suspect. Even unsolved crimes from 30, 40 years ago, with the advances in DNA, um, those unsolved murders or unsolved mysteries are one by one being solved because of DNA evidence. And blood is the most common bodily substance found. DNA is found in every cell in every body and is unique to every individual, exception being for twins. And DNA testing can therefore link or exclude anyone from a crime. As I said just before, DNA evidence has changed everything. Everything about crime scene investigation has been changed because of crime scene. It is no wonder from this kind of change on platforms such as Netflix, there are so many TV shows on Netflix, from Forensic Files to Confessions of a Murderer, the Ted Bundy trial, tape recordings there, or Snap. There are literally dozens of shows now going on because of DNA evidence. It's changed. The whole investigation has changed so incredibly much. It is revolutionary. It's not even, it's revolutionary and revolutionary. That's why, going back to why it's so important to preserve the crime scene, make sure nothing is tampered, why there's a perimeter, why there's those four different officer types. It's incredible, really. And of course, typical science for those who want to a little more course is the typical base strands for the DNA, image of how DNA is tested in a lab to prove or disprove suspects, the slides of the actual DNA there, linking it to it. A few couple political cartoons that kind of delivers a really succinct message uh, about it. But also in this cartoon, it shows just how much um, even the legal system itself has changed. Criminal code has changed. Investigation and arrest has changed because of DNA evidence. So, with all that change, what happens to the evidence? Hair and clothing fibers can be also used to connect a suspect to a crime scene. Once physical evidence has been collected, it must be carefully labeled and stored. There has to be a clear chain of custody that's established with a witness written record of all people who had control over the evidence. And in this chain of custody, it must show who had contact with the evidence, the day and time where it was handled, the circumstances where it was handled, what if any changes were being made. There is a lot of oversight to make sure everything is as clean as possible there to survive really the scrutiny of the courts. And with the arrest and detention, these procedures dealing with the arrest of suspects are outlined in the Criminal Code of Canada and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If the proper procedures are not followed, the evidence may lead to charges being dropped because of inadmissible evidence. And the detained or arrested person has the right to remain silent, to know what the reason for the arrest, and the right to a lawyer. And once a person has been informed of the rights, anything they say or do can be put in writing and used against them. There actually is a stage for it. An actual stage of interrogating a suspect is fourfold. First is that they must ask the suspect to describe the entire incident. Second, describe the period before the incident. Third, describe the actual offense. And fourth, describe what happened during the period after the evidence. During the interrogation time, the officers are looking to establish a timeline and whether the timeline matches what the evidence has shown there. And this is where a lot of times the potential offenders will try to lie, and investigators are really skilled to know when someone is lying or avoiding the truth based upon the evidence or eyewitness accounts that have been found, even from cell phone pingings to closed circuit TV cameras, phone activity, email activity, text activity. What I'm basically referring to is the digital footprint, even like credit cards. But the main point of this four-star stage approach or interrogating suspects is to arrive at the truth of what had happened there. And once the truth has been evolved, then the arrest usually happens. And arrest involves legally depriving someone of their liberty by seizing or touching the person to indicate that he or she is under arrest. In order for the arrest to be lawful, there are their steps. And there actually are four steps for arrest to be lawful. First, they must identify themselves as an officer. Second, advise the accused of what they are being arrested of. Third, inform them promptly of the charge and or the arrest warrant. And fourth, touch the accused to indicate that he or she is under arrest. Once the accused is in custody, the police must inform the person of the right to counsel, i.e., legal representation. Another option compared to arrest is detention. Detention is illegally depriving a person of liberty by seizing or touching a person to indicate he or she is in custody. It's mainly done to get a person to answer a few questions or determine if the person is a suspect. If you refuse, then you may be placed under arrest. But the police must have reasonable grounds to arrest someone, and this information that will lead to a reasonable person to conclude that a suspect had committed the actual offense there. So what happened in the G20 riots sometimes can be viewed as detention. But police have three methods of apprehending an offender. First is an appearance notice to a police station. Second, arresting someone with a warrant. Or third, arresting without a warrant immediately available. Now, appearance notice is a legal document that usually issues for less serious offense, which is compelling a person to appear in court. This usually tends to involve things like summary convictions or less serious indictable offenses. However, if someone fails to appear at the appearance notice in court, then a bench warrant can be issued. And this arrest warrant is issued directly by a judge when the accused person fails to appear in court from the appearance notice. Now, arresting with a warrant is kind of what it implies. Police will obtain an arrest warrant with the statement given under oath telling the court that the details of the offense is given to the police before a judge. Police lay the information, the judge will decide if a public interest to issue a warrant or not, and the arrest warrant is a written court order placing and directing the police to arrest the suspect. It contains the name of the accused, the warrant, and the reason for it. Arresting a warrant is also what it implies, but there are three circumstances in which police can arrest someone without a warrant. First, they have to have reasonable grounds to believe the person has committed the offense. Second, they find the person in the act of committing the offense. Or third, they find a person who they believe is named on the arrest warrant there. The variations is also peace officers, mayors, prison guards, custom officials, aircraft pilots, and fisheries officers can also arrest an individual without a warrant. Example, the aircraft pilot can do an arrest without a warrant. That's been something that's been put in place ever since the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Towers and the change that brought about to the commercial airline industry. Now, citizens' arrest is a very controversial part. This is an arrest without warrant by any person other than a peace officer. Immediately following such an arrest, the suspect must be turned over to an actual peace officer or police officer. Now, a citizen's arrest can be made under these circumstances. One, the person is whom he finds committing an indictable offense, the person who, in reasonable grounds, he believes is committed, or the owner of property, or a person is authorized by the owner can arrest whom he finds committing a criminal offense or relation to that property. While the citizen's arrest is not illegal under the Canadian Criminal Code, the RCMP and the police highly discourage it for a plethora of reasons, from risk of actual harm to the person and also the actual perpetrator's own charter constitutional rights being violated. Searches is when for the charter protects people from illegal search and seizure, and here are some rules around it. When you please search a person, please do not have to retain a warrant to search anyone they arrest as long as they have conditions being met. First, the arrest is lawful. Second, the search is connected to a lawful arrest, and third, the manner in which is carried out there, such as public celebrations. Impaired driving is when someone is driving under the influence, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or cannabis. And then there's also some various other methods where the warrant will issue various details, the, when the search must take place, please identifying themselves there, just being kept until the trial. Sometimes a telewarrant could be done, faxes. There's so many other kind of options to it. And what happens after arrest? After being arrested of an indictable offense, a person may expect to be fingerprinted and photographed and sometimes participate in a lineup. If a person is not charged or is acquitted in court, the arrest record is kept only 10 years before it is destroyed. By the way, lineup is when a group of people are shown to a victim or witness for purpose of identifying their, but cannot be forced on the arrested person there. And after arrested procedure, the arrest proceeds. A person is often released until trial. However, the police may ask you to sign a promise to appear notice. Some may require a recognize or guarantee that the accused will appear. Or police may also request a surety where a person agrees to make a payment if the accused does not appear. Or actual to person is just kept under police custody until the trial, and that leads to the bail. The bail is a temporary release of an accused who posts money or some sort of security for their release there. The application is made before a judge, but if the Crown decides not to warrant the accused person released before a trial, a show cause hearing is held. For a show cause can also be accused of fleeing if they may be a threat to society. However, in some cases, there is a reverse onus where the accused has to show up and why bail should be granted. But from reverse onus versus habeas corpus, there, reverse onus applies only when, for four reasons. One, the accused is charged with committing an indictable offense while already out on bail. Or second, the offense is indictable when the defendant is not a citizen of Canada. Third, the charge involves failure to appear or breach of bail conditions. Or fourth, the accused um, is charged of importing, trafficking, possession of purposes of trafficking narcotics, or various other kind of parts that are part of the Canadian Criminal Code.